The emergency room doors burst open, flooding the sterile white corridor with the stench of leather, whiskey, and trouble. Ray the Hammer Thompson stomped in, his massive frame dwarfing the two nervous orderlies who scattered at his approach. Behind him, three Steel Wolves gang members dragged in a fourth, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his shoulder. "Fix him, now!" Ray's voice cut through the hushed panic of the small-town ER. Sarah Blackwood emerged from behind the nurse's station, her movements calm yet precise. Her auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, her blue scrubs immaculate, her eyes revealing nothing. "Sir, we'll need to get him registered and—" The slap echoed like a gunshot. Sarah's head snapped sideways with the impact, a red handprint blooming instantly on her cheek. Before she could recover, Ray grabbed her collar and yanked downward, the fabric of her white coat and blue scrub top tearing with a sickening rip. Then, silence. Complete, utter silence. Where there should have been just skin, Ray and his men found themselves staring at a tattoo that spread across her upper chest and shoulder. Not some butterfly or heart, but the unmistakable combat medic insignia, surrounded by unit designations only military insiders would recognize. Battle markers, deployment indicators. The kind of ink that wasn't bought, it was earned. Ray's face drained of color. "You're—" Sarah's eyes changed. The professional mask of the nurse evaporated, replaced by something cold. Something lethal. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost gentle, yet it made every man in the room instinctively take a step back. "The last man who put his hands on me like that never spoke again." Her gaze locked with Ray's, unblinking. "Now I'll treat your friend because that's my job. But you have 5 seconds to back away before I forget I'm a healer first." Not a single member of the Steel Wolves moved a muscle. They had come looking for a small-town nurse. They'd found something else entirely. The mountains cradled Pine Ridge like weathered hands around a fragile egg. Once a booming mining town, it now housed just over 5,000 souls who prized their distance from the chaos of cities. Main Street still sported the original storefronts from the 1920s, though faded Coca-Cola signs and buzzing neon beer advertisements betrayed the march of time. Inside the Antler Inn, Kenny Rogers crooned from the jukebox while the bartender, Tom Murphy, polished glasses with practiced efficiency. A group of regulars nursed their beers, occasionally glancing up at the small television mounted in the corner, where CNN replayed highlights of Operation Desert Storm's successful conclusion. And President Bush's approval ratings continue to soar in the aftermath of the Gulf War victory, the anchor announced over footage of troops returning home to ticker-tape parades. The door swung open, letting in a gust of early autumn air that disturbed the cigarette smoke hanging in lazy clouds. Conversations paused. The newcomer stood framed in the doorway, taking the measure of the place before stepping inside. Tom had seen countless strangers pass through over his 23 years behind the bar, but something about this woman made him straighten up. Maybe it was the way she scanned the room, not nervous, but methodical, like she was memorizing exit points. Maybe it was the way she moved, fluid, deliberate, no wasted motion. Or maybe it was simply that Pine Ridge didn't get many newcomers who looked like they could handle themselves. "Help you, ma'am?" Tom called out. She approached the bar, her boots making surprisingly little sound on the wooden floor. "Coffee black, and directions to the hospital if you don't mind." Her voice was pleasant but clipped, with a precision that didn't quite match the casual setting. Up close, Tom noticed the auburn hair tucked behind her ears, the clear green eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing much in return. She wasn't flashy, didn't wear makeup beyond maybe some lip balm, but there was a natural beauty to her that caught attention. "Pine Ridge Memorial's about 3 blocks east. Can't miss it," Tom replied, pouring her coffee. "You a new doctor?" A slight smile. "Nurse, starting tomorrow." "Well, welcome to Pine Ridge, miss." Blackwood, Sarah Blackwood. The name would soon be known by every soul in town. But that evening, she was just another stranger passing through, or so they thought. The Jeep Cherokee, a 1984 model covered in dust from the long drive, pulled into the gravel driveway of a small cabin on the outskirts of town. Sarah cut the engine and sat motionless for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling motor and the whisper of pine needles in the breeze. Her new home stood before her, a rental, One bedroom plus a small study with a covered porch and a view of the mountains. Isolated enough to provide privacy, close enough to town for a quick drive in an emergency. Perfect. Inside, the cabin remained as Spartan as a military barracks. A single suitcase lay open on the bed, revealing meticulously folded clothes. No personal items adorned the nightstand, save a simple alarm clock and a dog-eared paperback, Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. Sarah moved to the bathroom, shedding her jacket to reveal arms corded with lean muscle. Standing before the mirror, she studied the tattoo that stretched across her upper chest, right shoulder, and part of her back. The combat medic insignia intertwined with unit designations, service markers, and symbols intelligible only to those who had served in certain elite units. Her fingers traced the scar that ran along her collarbone, then another at her ribs, souvenirs from another life. From a locked case beneath the bed, she retrieved a Beretta M9, standard military issue, checked the chamber with practiced ease, then returned it to its hiding place. Next came a medical kit far more comprehensive than any civilian would own, which she inspected with professional detachment before securing it in the bathroom cabinet. Later, as darkness settled over the mountains, Sarah Blackwood stood on her porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, eyes scanning the tree line with the habitual vigilance of someone who had learned the hard way that peace was often an illusion. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope it might last. Pine Ridge seemed quiet, safe. They always did, in the beginning. Pine Ridge Memorial Hospital had seen better days. Built in the 1960s, the two-story brick building served the town and surrounding communities with 40 beds, a small emergency department, and a surgery suite adequate for appendectomies and broken bones, but little more. Serious cases got airlifted to Casper or Denver. Dr. Mike Reynolds' office reflected the man himself, organized, unpretentious, and bearing the patina of decades of service. At 65, with a full head of silver hair and hands that still moved with surgical precision despite arthritis, he remained the backbone of medicine in Pine Ridge. A framed photo on the wall showed a much younger Mike in an Army Medical Corps uniform, standing beside a MASH unit during the Korean War. Sarah sat across from him, her resume open on the desk between them. Her back was straight, her hands resting lightly on her lap, the posture of someone who had spent years at attention. 20 years as an Army nurse, followed by 5 at Walter Reed, Mike noted, looking up from the papers. Extensive trauma experience, highest recommendations. He removed his reading glasses. What I don't see is why someone with your qualifications wants to work in a place where the biggest excitement is usually a hunting accident or a bar fight. Sarah met his gaze evenly. I've had enough excitement for one lifetime, Dr. Reynolds. Mike, please. He leaned back, studying her with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. Most people running from something don't run to the middle of nowhere, Ms. Blackwood. I'm not running from something. A pause. I'm running toward quiet. Mike nodded slowly, a flash of understanding crossing his features. He'd seen that look before, in his own mirror, decades ago. The 1,000-yard stare that never quite went away, just receded enough to function. PTSD? Managed, she replied without hesitation or shame. He nodded again. We could use someone with your experience. Our head ER nurse retired last month, and frankly, we're struggling to fill the position. Small towns don't attract talent easily. I'm not looking for advancement or accolades, just a place where I can do good work and breathe. Something in her voice, a whisper of exhaustion, of battles fought too long, resonated with Mike. He stood, offering his hand. Welcome to Pine Ridge Memorial, Nurse Blackwood. When can you start? Tomorrow. Mike smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. As Sarah left his office, Mike returned to the window, watching her walk to her Jeep. His instincts, honed by decades of practicing medicine and years in a war zone, told him there was more to Sarah Blackwood than an experienced nurse seeking rural tranquility. He didn't know what shadows dogged her steps, but he recognized a soldier when he saw one. And soldiers, he knew, rarely left the battlefield behind entirely. The emergency department at Pine Ridge Memorial operated with the efficient rhythm common to small-town hospitals, quiet punctuated by bursts of activity. Within a week, Sarah had reorganized the supply closets, implemented a more efficient triage system, and earned the respect of the staff with her competence and unflappable demeanor. Always in long sleeves despite the lingering summer heat, always wearing surgical gloves even for non-sterile procedures, she moved through the department like a ghost, present everywhere but somehow apart, efficient yet distant. "You're the first person I've seen who can intimidate Dr. Harrison just by raising an eyebrow," Emily Parker remarked during a rare quiet moment. At 35, Emily represented the heart of Pine Ridge. Born and raised locally, she knew every patient by name and often their parents and grandparents as well. Her perpetual smile and relentless optimism initially grated on Sarah, but gradually became a welcome counterpoint to her own reserve. "He's sloppy with his charting," Sarah replied, checking inventory with military precision. "He's been sloppy for 20 years, Emily laughed. "Hey, a bunch of us are going to the Antler after shift. You should come. 3 weeks here, and you're still a mystery woman." "I prefer it that way." Emily leaned against the counter, undeterred. "Nobody stays a mystery in Pine Ridge for long. Might as well surrender to the inevitable and let us get to know you on your terms." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. "Maybe next time." Later, a logging accident brought in 3 casualties simultaneously, throwing the small ER into controlled chaos. While other staff members showed signs of strain, Sarah operated with the calm efficiency of someone who had treated far worse under far more difficult conditions. When a severed artery began spraying blood across the trauma bay, Sarah clamped it with her bare hand until the doctor could secure it properly, her face betraying no emotion, even as crimson stained her scrubs. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't panic. "Where did you learn to handle pressure like that?" Dr. Harrison asked afterward, genuine admiration in his voice. Sarah wiped blood from her forearm, her expression neutral. "Practice." That night, alone in her cabin, Sarah ran 5 miles through the forest in the darkness, pushed through 100 push-ups, and practiced disassembling and reassembling her Beretta blindfolded until her fingers bled. Only then, physically exhausted, could she hope for sleep without the dreams that still came anyway. In one drawer of her bedside table lay a bottle of prescription sleep medication she refused to take. In another, a satellite phone that hadn't rung in months. Both represented connections to a world she was trying to leave behind. One through chemistry, the other through loyalty to comrades who still operated in shadows. Sarah Blackwood was building a new life in Pine Ridge, one careful day at a time. But beneath the scrubs and professional demeanor, the warrior remained vigilant, waiting. Mike Reynolds stayed late most evenings, catching up on paperwork after the clinic closed. Tonight, a special report on CNN had caught his attention, a retrospective on Desert Storm, focusing on the medical personnel who had served. Among the most decorated combat medics was a woman whose identity remains classified due to her involvement in special operations. Known only by the call sign Angel of Death, this combat nurse reportedly saved over 100 lives while also participating directly in combat operations, an unusual dual role even in modern warfare. The grainy footage showed a female soldier in desert fatigues, face partially obscured, assisting with a medical evacuation while gunfire echoed nearby. Something about the woman's movements, the efficiency and grace under pressure, sparked a memory. Mike reached for Sarah's personnel file, flipping to the military discharge papers. Dates matched, qualifications matched, but the units listed were vague, medical support division, instead of specific assignments. He pulled an old photo album from his desk drawer, turning to pictures from his own military service decades earlier. There, a younger Mike stood beside a MASH unit sign, wearing the same combat medic insignia he glimpsed once when Sarah reached up to stock a high shelf, her sleeve riding up just enough to reveal part of a tattoo. The next morning, he called her into his office and closed the door. "I've been around long enough to know when someone's file has been sanitized," he said without preamble. "Your discharge papers list generic assignments, but your skills tell a different story." Sarah's posture shifted subtly, a defensive stance masked as casual. "Is there a problem with my work, Dr. Reynolds?" "Mike," he corrected automatically. "And no, your work is exemplary." He paused. "I served in Korea, MASH 85. I know what combat does to medical personnel. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the feeling that you've left part of yourself behind." Sarah remained silent, her face carefully blank. Mike continued, his voice gentle. I recognized your tattoo, not just the combat medic insignia, but the special operations markers. He met her gaze directly. You're her, aren't you? The one they called Angel of Death. The silence stretched between them, taut as a tripwire. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. That name was never my choice. Mike nodded. I understand keeping secrets, Sarah. I've kept plenty myself. He gestured to the framed photo. What those papers don't say is that I wasn't just treating broken bones in a MASH unit. I was patching up operatives who officially didn't exist, sending them back into missions that never happened. Something in Sarah's posture eased fractionally. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know you're not alone. Mike leaned forward. Your secret is safe with me. This town can be a sanctuary if you let it be. Sarah studied him, measuring his sincerity. I came here to leave that life behind. I know, but sometimes the past follows us, despite our best intentions. Mike smiled sadly. If that happens, you'll need allies who understand. For the first time since arriving in Pine Ridge, Sarah felt the weight on her shoulders lighten infinitesimally. Not gone, it would never be gone, but shared, if only by a fraction. Thank you, she said simply. As she left his office, Mike watched her go, wondering if Pine Ridge would be the sanctuary she sought, or merely another battlefield in disguise. Sheriff John Calloway had seen enough trouble in his 58 years to recognize its approach like an old adversary. 20 years in the Army Rangers followed by 15 as Pine Ridge's sheriff had honed his instincts to a fine edge. Instincts that were now screaming warnings. The reports from neighboring counties painted a clear picture. The Steel Wolves motorcycle gang was expanding their territory, moving methodically through small towns across Wyoming, establishing drug distribution networks and extortion rackets. 3 deputies for a town of 5,000 wouldn't stand a chance when they arrived. John's weathered face, creased from years of squinting into mountain sun and gunfire alike, remained impassive as he briefed Mike Reynolds in the hospital parking lot. Only the constant movement of his toothpick from one side of his mouth to the other betrayed his concern. They hit Rollins last week, John said, leaning against his cruiser. Left 2 shopkeepers in the hospital and the sheriff with a broken jaw. County resources are stretched too thin to help us if they come this way. Mike sighed, feeling every one of his 65 years. You think they're coming here next? Intelligence suggests we're on their expansion map. Small town, limited law enforcement, positioned well for distribution routes to larger markets. John's eyes, still sharp as a hawk's despite the crow's feet, scanned the horizon as if expecting to see dust clouds from approaching motorcycles. We need to prepare, Mike. Your ER might get busy. Neither man noticed Sarah standing near the hospital entrance, close enough to overhear their conversation. Her face remained professionally neutral, but her mind was already calculating threat assessments, cataloging potential defensive positions, evaluating resources. That evening, the local news ran a segment on the Steel Wolves' activities. The footage showed leather-clad men with heavy beards and heavier attitudes swaggering through a small town not unlike Pine Ridge. Their leader, a mountain of a man identified as Raymond the Hammer Thompson, stared into the camera with the dead-eyed confidence of someone unaccustomed to opposition. Sarah watched from her living room, a notebook open on her lap. By the segment's end, she had jotted down names, approximate numbers, invisible weapons, old habits. The satellite phone in her drawer suddenly felt heavier, its presence a reminder of connections she could still activate if necessary. Allies who would come if called, no questions asked. But making that call would mean acknowledging that her attempt at a normal life had failed before it truly began. Instead, she reached for her Beretta, field stripping it with practiced ease before reassembling it, the familiar ritual calming her mind. Tomorrow, she would visit the local hardware store for supplies that most would see as innocent home improvement materials, but which could serve other purposes if needed. Sarah Blackwood had come to Pine Ridge seeking peace, but peace, she knew better than most, sometimes required preparation for war. They came on a Tuesday, rumbling into town like distant thunder made manifest. First, a pair of scouts, younger members wearing the Steel Wolves colors, but lacking the full patches that denoted senior status. They circled Main Street twice, noting the sheriff's office, the bank, the few establishments worth extorting, before parking outside the Antler Inn. By noon, Pine Ridge's single diner had emptied of regular customers, replaced by leather-clad men who treated the staff with calculated disrespect. Not enough to justify intervention, but enough to establish dominance. They left insultingly small tips and made comments just crude enough to intimidate without crossing lines that would require Sheriff Calloway's immediate involvement. By evening, 15 motorcycles lined the street outside the Antler, their chrome gleaming in the sunset like bared teeth. Inside, Ray Thompson held court at the largest table, his massive frame dwarfing the wooden chair beneath him. At 45, with a graying beard reaching his chest and arms thick as fence posts, he projected the menacing authority that had made the Steel Wolves feared throughout the region. "Nice little town you got here," he remarked to Tom Murphy, who served drinks with the careful neutrality of a man walking a tightrope. "Quiet, peaceful. Be a shame if anything changed that." The threat hung in the air, wrapped in a thin veneer of conversation. From her Jeep parked across the street, Sarah observed the scene through binoculars, mentally cataloging faces, weapons bulges under jackets, and the group's dynamics. Her military training and intelligence gathering served her well, as she noted who deferred to whom, who carried themselves like they had combat experience versus common thugs, who appeared to handle communications. Ray Thompson concerned her most, not just his size, but the calculating intelligence behind his eyes. This wasn't some common criminal. This was a strategist expanding his territory with methodical precision. When Sheriff Calloway's cruiser pulled up outside the Antler, Sarah tensed. John entered alone, outnumbered 15-1, wearing nothing more protective than his regular uniform and standard-issue sidearm. Brave or foolish, sometimes the line blurred. Through the window, Sarah watched the sheriff approach Ray's table, his posture relaxed but alert. Words were exchanged, Ray's men laughing at something John said. The interaction ended without violence, but the message had been sent. The Steel Wolves weren't leaving, and the law couldn't make them. As John exited the bar, his eyes scanned the street, briefly meeting Sarah's gaze across the distance. A subtle nod passed between them. Recognition from one professional to another that the situation had escalated beyond normal parameters. Sarah started her Jeep and drove back to her cabin, mind already formulating contingencies. Inside, she moved the framed Hemingway poster in her bedroom, revealing a small wall safe. From it, she retrieved a satellite phone different from the one in her drawer, this one untraceable, meant for emergencies only. She didn't activate it, not yet, but having it close felt like strapping on armor, a recognition that Pine Ridge had just become a battlefield, whether its residents realized it or not. The Pine Ridge Community Center hadn't been filled to capacity in years, not since the mine closing announcement back in '85. Tonight, every folding chair was occupied, with more residents standing along the walls, faces etched with concern. Mayor Wilson, a portly man better suited to ribbon cuttings than crises, mopped his brow repeatedly as he tried to maintain order. "Please, everyone, one at a time. They threatened to burn down my store if I don't pay protection money." Frank Wilson, the hardware store owner, stood up, his weathered face flushed with anger. At 62, the former Green Beret still maintained the rigid posture of a soldier, though his hair had long since gone white. "I didn't fight for this country to hand it over to thugs." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Calloway stood beside the mayor, his expression grim. "I've requested assistance from the state police, but resources are stretched thin. They can provide periodic patrols, but not a constant presence." "So we're on our own?" someone called out. "Not entirely," John replied, "but we need to be realistic. The Steel Wolves have over 30 members in the area now. I have 3 deputies." From her position near the back wall, Sarah observed the community's reaction. Fear, anger, helplessness, emotions that could either paralyze or galvanize, depending on leadership. Her eyes caught a familiar face, Bob Miller, the local hunting guide. At 58, his weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a lifetime outdoors, but it was the way he scanned the room that interested Sarah. Not panicked, but assessing, like a soldier. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of mutual recognition passing between them before both looked away. Another potential ally, Sarah noted mentally. Mike Reynolds spoke up, his calm voice cutting through the noise. "We've established protocols at the hospital for treating any violence that may occur. and were coordinating with emergency services in neighboring counties for backup. What Mike didn't mention was the private meeting he'd had with Sarah that morning, discussing how to secure medications, establish triage areas, and create evacuation plans if the situation deteriorated further. Mayor Wilson attempted to reassure the crowd with platitudes about community spirit and working together, but his words fell flat against the harsh reality of their situation. As the meeting dissolved into arguing factions, those who wanted to stand and fight versus those who favored appeasement, Sarah slipped out the side door unnoticed, or almost unnoticed. Nurse Blackwood, Sheriff Calloway stood in the shadows beside the building, a cigarette glowing briefly as he inhaled. He'd quit smoking years ago, but kept a pack for what he called war councils. Sheriff, Sarah acknowledged him with a nod. You military? The directness of the question surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Was. John studied her through narrowed eyes. Not just any military, I'm guessing. You carry yourself different, see things others don't. Sarah remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. This situation's going to get worse before it gets better, John continued, dropping his cigarette and crushing it precisely under his boot. Good people are going to get hurt. That's why we have a hospital. A humorless smile crossed John's face. You know that's not what I meant. He straightened, adjusting his holster with the unconscious habit of a man long accustomed to carrying a weapon. If you've got skills beyond nursing, Nurse Blackwood, this town might need them before this is over. With that, he walked back inside, leaving Sarah alone with thoughts she'd hoped to leave behind in another life. The next morning, Pine Ridge awoke to find the Steel Wolves had expanded their presence. 3 businesses on Main Street now sported freshly broken windows, with crude wolf symbols spray-painted on the sidewalks outside, a clear message about whose territory this was becoming. The battle for Pine Ridge had begun, not with gunfire, but with the slow, methodical erosion of safety and normalcy, a type of warfare Sarah understood all too well. Friday nights typically brought the usual parade of minor emergencies to Pine Ridge Memorial. Sprained ankles, lacerations from kitchen mishaps, the occasional drunk needing stitches after an altercation at the Antler. This Friday brought something different. A Steel Wolves member arrived with a knife wound to his abdomen, supported by 2 associates who glared suspiciously at the hospital staff. The injured man, who identified himself only as Crusher, refused to explain how he'd been stabbed, though the defensive wounds on his hands told their own story. Sarah took charge immediately, directing Emily and the other staff with calm efficiency as they prepared for emergency surgery. Dr. Harrison was on call but still 20 minutes out. They would need to stabilize the patient themselves. BP's dropping, Emily reported, her usual cheerfulness replaced by professional focus. 90/60 and falling. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision, finding the source of bleeding and applying pressure while simultaneously setting up an IV line. Type and cross for 4 units. Start 2 large-bore IVs with normal saline wide open. Her voice betrayed no stress, no hurry, just the steady cadence of someone who had treated far worse injuries under far more difficult circumstances. The 2 Steel Wolves members loomed in the doorway, their presence a silent intimidation. When a young orderly asked them to step back, one grabbed his scrub top, yanking him close. You better save him, or we'll come back for all of you, he growled. Let him go. Sarah's command cut through the tension, her eyes never leaving her patient, but her voice carrying an authority that stopped even the biker short. If you want your friend to live, back up and let us work. Something in her tone, the absolute certainty, the implied threat, made the man release the orderly and step back. As Sarah worked, she noticed something clutched in the patient's hand, a small bag of white powder. With a subtle movement that even Emily didn't catch, she slipped it into her pocket for later inspection. Information could be as valuable as ammunition in the coming conflict. Dr. Harrison arrived, taking over the surgery while Sarah assisted. Throughout the procedure, she appeared focused solely on saving the patient, but her ears caught fragments of conversation between the waiting bikers. Shipment coming Tuesday. Ray says we need to secure the north route. That new place by the old mine shaft. Each piece of information filed away, creating a picture of the Steel Wolves operation in Pine Ridge. Hours later, with Crusher stabilized and admitted, Sarah found a moment alone to examine the packet she'd confiscated. Not just any drugs, high-grade pharmaceutical opioids, the kind that suggested connections to medical supply theft or corrupt healthcare workers. The Steel Wolves weren't just running street drugs, they were part of something larger. Sarah secured the evidence in her locker, then made her way to Sheriff Calloway's office, moving through back streets to avoid being seen. The information she'd gathered, combined with the drug sample, painted a disturbing picture. Pine Ridge wasn't just another town for the Steel Wolves to intimidate, it was a strategic location for a major distribution hub. They're establishing a pipeline, she explained to John, who listened with the focused attention of a fellow professional. The timing, the specific routes they mentioned, this isn't random. They're setting up infrastructure. John rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Makes sense. We're positioned at the crossroads of 3 county highways, minimal law enforcement presence, close to state lines for quick exit if needed. There's more. Sarah hesitated, then continued. The quality of these opioids suggests a professional source. Hospital theft, corrupt pharmacist, possibly someone with connections to pharmaceutical manufacturing. Meaning they've got resources beyond what we're seeing, John concluded. Damn, Sarah leaned forward. Sheriff, this town isn't equipped to handle what's coming. The Steel Wolves aren't just passing through, they're establishing a base of operations. Once entrenched, they'll be nearly impossible to dislodge. What do you suggest? We're outnumbered, outgunned, and the state police can't dedicate enough resources to help. Sarah met his gaze directly. Then we need to change the equation. How? By using what they don't expect. Sarah's expression hardened with resolve. They see a small town with a few cops and civilians. They don't know what or who they're really facing. John studied her for a long moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. And who exactly are they facing? Nurse Blackwood? Sarah stood, the overhead light catching the edge of her tattoo just visible at her collar. Someone who's dealt with worse threats than Ray Thompson. As she turned to leave, John called after her. The mayor's telling me to avoid confrontation, to negotiate. Sarah paused at the door. Men like Ray don't negotiate, Sheriff. They only understand one thing, superior force. Her voice softened slightly. I came here hoping to leave violence behind, but sometimes the only way to peace is through the fire. Outside, darkness had fallen over Pine Ridge, the streets eerily quiet as residents retreated behind locked doors, a town under siege without a shot being fired. Sarah walked back toward the hospital, aware of eyes watching from the shadows. Steel Wolves members establishing surveillance, marking their territory. The battle lines were being drawn. Soon there would be no neutral ground left in Pine Ridge. And Sarah Blackwood, who had come seeking healing and found war instead, felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders once again. Not just for herself, but for Mike, for Emily, for an entire town caught in the crossfire of forces they didn't understand. The nurse had tried to leave the warrior behind, but as she looked toward the lights of the hospital, her sanctuary now threatened, Sarah knew sometimes the healer and the warrior were two sides of the same coin, both sworn to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Pine Ridge would need both before this was over. The abandoned warehouse at the edge of Pine Ridge had once housed mining equipment during the town's more prosperous days. Now its corrugated metal walls vibrated with the rumble of motorcycle engines and hard rock music as the Steel Wolves converted it into their command center. The perimeter bristled with lookouts, their silhouettes backlit by burn barrels that pushed back against the autumn chill. Inside, Ray Thompson paced across concrete floors stained with decades of industrial oil and fresh motorcycle tire marks. Maps of Pine Ridge and surrounding counties covered one wall, marked with routes, drop points, and timetables. This wasn't just a gang staking territory. It was a military operation disguised as criminal enterprise. Crusher's still in the hospital, reported a wiry man named Viper, Ray's lieutenant and head of intelligence. Sheriff's been nosing around, asking questions about where he got stabbed. Ray's massive fist slammed into a support beam, the sound echoing like a gunshot. That backwater lawman thinks he's dealing with common thugs. His eyes, cold as Wyoming winter, narrowed. It's time to show this town who really owns it. By morning, Pine Ridge awakened to a changed landscape. 4 businesses found their front windows shattered, crude wolf symbols spray-painted across brick facades. The message was clear. Protection payments weren't optional. The Pine Ridge Gazette's headline captured the town's growing fear. Crime wave hits small town. Police resources stretched thin. Beneath it, a quote from Mayor Wilson urging calm and cooperation read like a surrender document. At the hospital, Sarah watched the Steel Wolves' methodical takeover with the clinical detachment of someone who had observed similar patterns in war zones across the world. Territorial marking, psychological intimidation, isolation of authority figures, classic insurgency tactics. 3 more patients overnight, Emily reported during shift change. Dark circles beneath her normally bright eyes, all with accidental injuries after visits from the wolves. Sarah nodded, noting how the younger nurse now kept her back to the wall and eyes on the entrance, adopting defensive habits unconsciously. Any word from Sheriff Calloway? He's requested state troopers again, but they're dealing with similar problems in 2 other counties. Emily lowered her voice. People are saying we should just let them take what they want. That fighting back will only make it worse. Sarah had heard such sentiments before. In villages in Iraq, in remote outposts in Afghanistan, the calculus of survival versus resistance. Sometimes, she said carefully, not fighting back simply postpones the inevitable. Emily studied her with newfound awareness. You've seen this before, haven't you? Not here, but somewhere. Sarah met her gaze steadily. Predators are the same everywhere, Emily. Different uniforms, same playbook. Later that day, Mike Reynolds called Sarah into his office, closing the door with unusual care. His face carried the gravity of a physician about to deliver terminal news. The Steel Wolves have escalated, he said without preamble. They've approached our pharmaceutical supplier, threatened the delivery drivers. Sarah understood immediately. They want to control medication shipments, especially opioids. Mike nodded. They're offering protection for our deliveries at the cost of allowing certain shipments to go missing. If we refuse, the deliveries stop altogether, Sarah finished. The strategy was elegant in its brutality. A rural hospital couldn't function without regular supply deliveries. The board is split, Mike continued, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. Half want to notify the DEA, half want to accommodate the wolves temporarily while seeking a solution. And there is no accommodation with men like Ray Thompson, Sarah said, her voice hardening. Give an inch today, lose everything tomorrow. Mike studied her with weary eyes. I was hoping you'd say that. The door to Sheriff Calloway's modest house opened before Sarah could knock, revealing John in civilian clothes, flannel shirt, worn jeans, and an expression that said he'd been expecting her. Took you long enough, he remarked, stepping aside to let her enter. Inside, the home reflected its owner, functional, organized, with military precision evident in the perfectly arranged furniture and spotless surfaces. A display case held Army Ranger insignia and commendations, while bookshelves contained volumes on military history and law enforcement tactics. The hospital's being squeezed, Sarah said without preamble, accepting the coffee John offered. The wolves are targeting our supply lines. John nodded. Frank's hardware store got the same treatment yesterday. So did the grocery and gas station. He gestured toward a map of Pine Ridge spread across his dining table. They're isolating critical resources, standard siege tactics. Sarah studied the map, noting John's markings of wolf activities and movements. You've been tracking them systematically. 20 years in the Rangers teaches you to know your enemy. John took a seat across from her. But tracking isn't stopping. I've got 3 deputies, limited jurisdiction, and a mayor who's considering offering the wolves business licenses to legitimize their presence. You need force multiplication, Sarah observed, military terminology slipping naturally into her assessment. What I need, John replied evenly, is to know exactly who I'm talking to. His gaze locked onto hers, not the nurse from Walter Reed, the person behind that. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Sarah placed her coffee mug down with deliberate care. Officially, I was a combat medic with the Army Nurse Corps, she began, each word measured. Unofficially, I served with specialized units whose existence isn't widely acknowledged. Joint operations, cross-trained in both advanced battlefield medicine and direct action. The angel of death, John said quietly. Sarah's expression hardened. A nickname I never wanted. The enemy gave it to me after an operation where I treated our wounded, then took up a fallen soldier's weapon to hold off attackers while the medevac arrived. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes reflected memories she'd tried to leave behind. 18 hostiles eliminated, 12 friendlies saved. The story got out, exaggerated, became something I couldn't control. John nodded slowly. I served with a man named Thomas Blackwood in the Rangers. Older than you. Any relation? My brother. Sarah's expression softened fractionally. He died in Panama in 1989. I know, John said quietly. I was there. He was a good man, saved my unit from an ambush. He paused. He mentioned a sister following him into service. Said she was twice the soldier he'd ever be. Something shifted in Sarah's posture, a microscopically small relaxation, the recognition of a connection that transcended their current circumstances. Pine Ridge is under siege, Sarah, John continued, using her first name for the first time. I need to know if you're willing to help defend it. I came here to escape violence, not bring more of it. Sometimes we don't get to choose our battlefields. John gestured toward the window where the distant lights of Pine Ridge glowed against the darkening skyline. These are good people. They don't deserve what's coming. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had changed, a decision made, a line crossed. I'll need to know exactly what resources we have. People, weapons, defensible positions. John's weathered face broke into a grim smile. I thought you might say that. He reached under the table, producing a locked case that he opened with a key from his pocket. Inside lay a satellite phone similar to Sarah's emergency device. We might not be as alone as you think. The following evening, Mike Reynolds stayed late at the hospital, reviewing supply inventories in light of the wolves' threats. The hallway stood eerily quiet, most non-emergency procedures canceled as patients increasingly avoided coming to town. The sound of heavy boots in the corridor made him look up, tension immediately tightening his shoulders. Without knocking, Ray Thompson pushed open the office door, flanked by two Stonewolves members, whose hands rested suggestively near concealed weapons. Evening, Doc. Ray's massive frame seemed to fill the small office as he dropped uninvited into the chair opposite Mike's desk. Thought it was time we had a private chat about community health services. Mike's expression remained professionally neutral, though his hand discreetly moved toward the panic button installed beneath his desk, a recent addition suggested by Sarah. Mr. Thompson, what can I do for you? Ray smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. It's more about what we can do for each other. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees, a position that emphasized his physical power. Pine Ridge Memorial is a vital community resource. Would be a shame if your supply deliveries encountered problems. We're a hospital, not a pharmacy, Mike replied evenly. Most of our medications are tightly controlled and tracked by federal agencies. That's exactly why partnerships are valuable. Ray's voice remained conversational, but the threat beneath was unmistakable. Certain shipments get rerouted. Paperwork shows they arrive damaged. Insurance covers the loss. Everyone wins. Mike met his gaze steadily. Except the patients who need those medications. Don't play moral high ground with me, Doc. Ray's tone hardened. You think the pharmaceutical companies give a damn about your little town? They're the biggest drug dealers in America, just with better suits and government protection. From her position around the corner, Sarah listened intently, her body coiled with tension. She'd been checking inventory when hospital security quietly alerted her to the visitors, allowing her to position herself nearby, close enough to intervene, far enough to remain undetected. I won't participate in diverting medications, Mike said, his voice firm, despite his 65 years. This hospital serves the community, not criminal enterprises. Ray's expression darkened. He stood slowly, looming over the desk. That's disappointing, Doc, real disappointing. He glanced around the office, eyes lingering on the Korean War photos. Nice place you got here. A lot of flammable materials in a hospital, though. Oxygen tanks, chemicals, accidents happen. Mike rose as well, dignity straightening his spine despite being several inches shorter than Ray. Are you threatening me, Mr. Tompkin? Educating you, Ray corrected with mock politeness. About risk management. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Think it over. You've got 48 hours before we need an answer. After they departed, Sarah emerged from her hiding place, finding Mike staring out the window at the parking lot where the bikers mounted their motorcycles. You heard? He asked without turning. Every word. Sarah moved beside him, her presence somehow both calming and dangerous, like the eye of a hurricane. It's escalating faster than I anticipated. Mike turned to face her. I won't give in to them, Sarah. Not even to buy time. I know. She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, a rare gesture of physical connection from someone who typically maintained careful distance. And we won't let you face them alone. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection deeper than colleagues, a shared resolve that needed no articulation. I need to make a call, Sarah said finally, her hand dropping away. It's time to change the rules of engagement. The emergency room's night shift had just begun when the radio crackled with news of a multiple vehicle accident on the highway outside town. 3 minutes later, ambulance sirens wailed in the distance. Trauma teams ready, Sarah commanded, her voice calm yet carrying unmistakable authority as staff moved with practiced efficiency. Emily, prep Bay 1 for the critical patient. Dr. Harrison is 10 minutes out. The ambulance doors burst open, paramedics rushing in with a stretcher bearing a large man in leather colors. A Steel Wolves member with a deep laceration across his abdomen and a compound fracture of his left leg. Blood soaked through pressure bandages, his ashen face indicating significant blood loss. Motorcycle versus guardrail, the paramedic reported tersely. BP 9060 and falling. Second patient incoming with minor injuries. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision, cutting away blood-soaked leather to expose the wound while issuing rapid-fire orders. Years of battlefield medicine had honed her ability to triage instantly, to focus on the most life-threatening injuries first while maintaining situational awareness. She had just started an IV when the emergency room doors slammed open again, not with another patient, but with Ray Thompson and 3 Steel Wolves members, faces tight with anger and concern. That's Hammer's brother, Emily whispered urgently to Sarah. His right-hand man. Ray stormed toward the trauma bay, shoving aside an orderly who attempted to block his path. What the hell happened to him? He demanded, looming over the treatment area where Sarah worked to stabilize the injured biker. Sir, you need to step back, a young nurse protested, only to be roughly pushed aside. He needs immediate surgery, Sarah stated without looking up, her gloved hands moving steadily despite the intimidating presence. The femoral artery is damaged. He's lost significant blood. Then fix him, Ray roared, fists clenching at his sides. Now, Sarah continued working, her focus absolute. Dr. Harrison is en route. We're stabilizing him for surgery. One of the wolves stepped forward, grabbing Sarah's arm. You heard the boss. Fix him now. In a single fluid motion that spoke of years of combat training, Sarah broke the man's grip and resumed working, never taking her eyes off her patient. Touch me again and you'll be in the next bed, she said, her voice eerily calm. This man will die if I stop. Back up or get out. The tension in the room crystallized, time seeming to slow as Ray's face darkened with rage. His massive hands shot out, grabbing Sarah's shoulder and spinning her away from the patient. The slap echoed through the suddenly silent emergency room. Sarah's head snapped sideways from the impact, a bright red handprint blooming instantly on her cheek. Before she could recover, Ray grabbed her white coat and blue scrub top at the collar, yanking downward with a savage motion. Fabric tore with a sickening rip, exposing her upper chest and shoulder. Then silence fell. Complete, utter silence. Where there should have been just skin, Ray and his men found themselves staring at a tattoo that spread across her upper chest and shoulder. Not some butterfly or heart, but the unmistakable combat medic insignia, surrounded by unit designations only military insiders would recognize. Battle markers, deployment indicators, the kind of ink that wasn't bought, it was earned. Ray's face drained of color. Sarah's eyes changed. The professional mask of the nurse evaporated, replaced by something cold, something lethal. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost gentle, yet it made every man in the room instinctively take a step back. The last man who put his hands on me like that never spoke again. her gaze locked with Ray's, unblinking. Now, I'll treat your brother because that's my job. But you have 5 seconds to back away before I forget I'm a healer first. Not a single member of the Steel Wolves moved a muscle. They had come looking for a small-town nurse. They'd found something else entirely. You're her, Ray finally managed, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. The angel of death. Sarah's expression remained unchanged as she turned back to her patient, resuming treatment with the same methodical precision. Emily, 4 units O negative now, and call Dr. Harrison again. Tell him we need him immediately. Ray took a single step backward, then another, his eyes never leaving Sarah's tattoo. The atmosphere in the room had fundamentally altered, the predators suddenly uncertain whether they were, in fact, the prey. We're not finished, Ray finally said, the threat in his voice undermined by a new note of wariness. Sarah didn't look up from her work. No, she agreed quietly, we're not. After the Steel Wolves reluctantly retreated to the waiting area, Emily approached Sarah, hands slightly trembling as she helped adjust a fresh scrub top over the torn one. Sarah, she whispered, eyes wide with shock and newfound understanding. Who are you really? Sarah secured an additional IV line before answering. Someone who came here hoping to escape her past. Her voice carried a weariness that transcended physical exhaustion. But it seems the past is never really finished with us. Later that night, after Ray's brother had been stabilized and transferred to surgery, Sarah slipped out of the hospital through a rear exit, her cheek still bearing the faint mark of Ray's hand. She drove not to her cabin, but to Sheriff Calloway's house, where lights still burned despite the late hour. John opened the door before she knocked, taking in her appearance with a single glance. It's happened, hasn't it? Sarah nodded once, stepping inside. They know who I am now. The timetable just accelerated. How long do we have? 24 hours, maybe less. Sarah's eyes held the focused calculation of a combat veteran. Ray Thompson just discovered he's not the most dangerous predator in Pine Ridge. He'll either retreat or escalate dramatically. Based on his psychological profile, I'm betting on escalation. John moved to his gun safe, entering the combination with practiced ease. Then we'd better get ready for war. The rising sun painted Pine Ridge in deceptively peaceful hues of gold and amber, belying the tension that had settled over the town like an invisible storm front. At Sarah's cabin, an impromptu council of war had assembled around her kitchen table. Mike Reynolds sat nursing a cup of black coffee, his medical bag beside him. A doctor prepared for casualties. John Calloway studied maps of the town, marking defensive positions and vulnerabilities with military precision. Frank Wilson from the hardware store cleaned a hunting rifle with the practiced movements of someone who'd maintained weapons most of his life. Ray's pulled everyone back to their compound at the old warehouse, John reported. No wolves visible in town this morning. They're regrouping. Sarah stood at the window, her posture reflecting years of military bearing. The morning light illuminated the now visible tattoo on her shoulder, no longer hidden beneath long sleeves. They'll be researching me, she said, her voice matter-of-fact, confirming what Ray suspects. And what exactly will they find? Frank asked, his weathered hands pausing on the rifle. At 62, the former Green Beret still maintained the alert eyes and ready posture of a soldier. Sarah turned to face them. The time for secrets had passed. Officially, I was a combat medic with the Army Nurse Corps, attached to various units during Desert Storm and other operations. 13 years active service, honorable discharge, followed by work at Walter Reed. She paused. Unofficially, I was part of a specialized joint task force that combined medical support with direct action capabilities. Our missions involved high-value target extraction, hostage rescue, and certain operations in denied areas where conventional forces couldn't go. The Ghost Unit, John said quietly. There were rumors in Ranger circles. Medical personnel cross-trained as combat operators. The perfect infiltration team. Who suspects the medics? Sarah neither confirmed nor denied the name. During an extraction in Iraq, our position was compromised. I was treating 3 wounded operators when we were surrounded. The security team was killed in the initial assault. Her voice remained steady, recounting facts without emotion. I secured the wounded, then engaged the attacking force while calling for emergency extraction. 18 hostiles eliminated, 12 friendlies evacuated alive. Mike looked up from his coffee. That's where the name came from? The Angel of Death? Enemy combatants reported being attacked by a female medic who couldn't be killed. Sarah replied with a slight shrug. The nickname spread among certain circles, eventually becoming problematic for operational security. After that, I was transitioned to training roles, then medical support at Walter Reed. And now you're here, Frank observed, trying to leave it all behind. That was the plan. Sarah's lips curved in a humorless smile, until Ray Thompson decided to establish operations in Pine Ridge. John spread a satellite photo of the warehouse compound across the table. Based on surveillance, they've got approximately 40 members present, with at least 15 having military or combat experience. Heavy weapons include shotguns, semi-automatic rifles, and possibly explosives. Against our four-person police department and a handful of volunteers, Mike said grimly. Numbers don't always determine outcomes, Sarah countered, joining them at the table. We have home field advantage, local knowledge, and they don't expect significant resistance. Frank nodded appreciatively, recognizing the tactical thinking. The element of surprise is a force multiplier. We need more than surprise, Sarah said. We need a force worth multiplying. She reached for her satellite phone. It's time to call in some old debts. As she dialed, the others exchanged glances, hope mingling with apprehension. They were planning for battle on American soil, against Americans. Not in defense of some foreign policy or abstract ideal, but to protect their homes, their town, their way of life. Sarah spoke briefly into the phone, using terms and codes the others didn't recognize, before hanging up. Help is coming, she said simply, but we need to survive until it arrives. The meeting continued, strategies forming and tasks assigned. Frank would secure supplies through his hardware store. Mike would prepare the hospital for casualties while evacuating non-essential patients. John would coordinate with his deputies and trusted townspeople who could assist. As they departed, Mike lingered behind, watching Sarah check and clean her Beretta with practiced ease. I knew you were running from something when you arrived, he said quietly. I just didn't realize you were also running towards something else. Sarah looked up, a question in her eyes. Peace, Mike explained. Not just the absence of conflict, but something more fundamental. The kind of peace that comes from being part of something worth protecting. Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. More than colleagues now, comrades preparing to face danger together. Be careful, Mike, Sarah said softly. Ray Thompson will target the hospital specifically now. It's personal. Mike's weathered face creased in a smile that held no humor. I've seen war before, Sarah. Different battlefield, same stakes. He hesitated, then added, when this is over, if we make it through. One battle at a time, Doctor, Sarah interrupted gently, though something in her expression softened. First we survive, then we'll see about everything else. As Mike left, Sarah turned back to the window, watching Pine Ridge in the morning light. Somewhere out there, Ray Thompson was planning his response, marshaling his forces for an assault on a town he believed defenseless. But Pine Ridge wasn't defenseless anymore. It had found its guardian, not the quiet nurse who had arrived seeking sanctuary, but the warrior who had never truly left the battlefield behind. The Angel of Death had found something worth fighting for again. Emily Parker had never considered herself brave. Competent, caring, dedicated to her patients? Yes, but not brave. Yet here she was, standing on Sarah's porch at dusk, fists clenched with nervous determination. The door opened before she could knock, revealing Sarah in civilian clothes, cargo pants and a fitted t-shirt that no longer concealed her tattoos or the lean muscle of someone trained for combat. Emily, Sarah's expression revealed surprise, then concern. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Nowhere is safe anymore, Emily replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. That's why I came. Inside, Sarah offered coffee, which Emily declined, too wound tight for caffeine. Instead, she paced the sparse living room, gathering courage for what she'd come to say. I've worked beside you for months, she began. I thought I knew you, the quiet nurse from back east, efficient and private. But that wasn't the whole truth, was it? Sarah remained silent, watching her with the patient focus of a predator or a protector. The tattoo, the way you handled those bikers. Emily's words tumbled faster now. People are talking about you being some kind of special forces soldier, about Ray Thompson preparing for war. She stopped pacing, facing Sarah directly. I need to know if it's true, all of it. Does it matter? Sarah asked quietly. Yes, Emily insisted, because if it is, I want to help the help. For a moment, Sarah's composure slipped, genuine surprise crossing her features. You don't know what you're asking, Emily. I know exactly what I'm asking. Emily's chin lifted slightly. This is my home. My patients, my friends, my family are all here. I can't just hide and hope someone else fixes this. Sarah studied her with new appreciation, recognizing the courage it took for a civilian, a healer, to step deliberately toward danger. What makes you think you can help? I know this town better than anyone. Every building, every back road, every person. Emily's voice strengthened with conviction. And I'm a fast learner. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah answered it cautiously, then stepped aside to admit Bob Miller, the local hunting guide. At 58, his weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a lifetime outdoors, but it was his eyes, alert, assessing, unafraid, that marked him as something more. Sheriff Calloway sent me, Bob explained, nodding a greeting to Emily. Said you might need someone who knows the mountains. And what else did he tell you? Sarah asked carefully. Bob's mouth quirked in a half smile. That the quiet nurse isn't so quiet after all. He extended his hand. Bob Miller, former Marine Scout sniper, 1st Marine Division, served in Vietnam, then as a contractor in various places that don't officially exist. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes as she shook his hand. You've been watching the situation. Since the wolves rolled into town, Bob confirmed, keeping my head down, assessing, old habits. And now I'm tired of watching scum terrorize good people. His voice hardened with resolve. The sheriff says you have a plan. I want in. Sarah glanced between Bob and Emily, the hardened veteran and the compassionate nurse, both offering themselves for a fight that wasn't rightfully theirs. Something stirred within her, a feeling almost forgotten in years of isolation and calculated distance. The profound bond of a unit forming, of people choosing to stand together against darkness. It won't be easy, she warned them, and it won't be safe. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Bob replied simply. Emily nodded her agreement, fear evident in her eyes but outweighed by determination. Tell us what to do. Before Sarah could respond, her satellite phone buzzed. The message was brief, coordinates, and a time. Midnight at the old fire lookout tower on Ridge Mountain. We have a meeting to attend, she told them, reaching for her jacket. Reinforcements are arriving. The moon hung heavy and full as Sarah's Jeep navigated the winding forest road, headlights off, guided only by starlight and Bob's intimate knowledge of the terrain. Emily sat tensely in the back seat, while Sarah drove with the focused calm of someone accustomed to night operations. At the designated coordinates, the abandoned fire lookout tower stood silhouetted against the starlit sky, seemingly deserted. Sarah parked well back from the clearing, directing Emily and Bob to wait while she approached alone, Beretta held low but ready. But she had taken only a few steps when a voice spoke from the darkness, female, confident, carrying the faintest trace of amusement. Still checking your 6 before breakfast, Angel? Sarah froze, then slowly relaxed, a rare smile spreading across her face as she holstered her weapon. Only when I'm in hostile territory, Ghost. From the shadows emerged a slender Asian-American woman in her early 40s, moving with the silent grace of someone who specialized in not being seen. Lisa Ghost Chen, dressed in civilian hiking gear that somehow looked tactical on her frame, embraced Sarah briefly but fiercely. Been a while, boss, she said, stepping back to study Sarah with sharp, intelligent eyes. You look good, almost peaceful. Almost, Sarah agreed wryly. Where are the others? Lisa grinned, then whistled, a sound like a night bird that would go unremarked in the forest. In response, figures emerged from concealment around the clearing, materializing from places Bob and Emily would have sworn were empty seconds before. James Doc Miller came first, a powerfully built man in his mid-40s whose gentle smile belied the combat medic insignia tattooed on his forearm. Then Marcus Tank Johnson, a mountain of a man whose dark skin gleamed in the moonlight as he approached, followed by Rebecca Raven Davis, her analytical eyes already mapping the terrain, and finally Carlos Shadow Mendez, moving with the liquid grace of a born infiltrator. Sarah's former unit, the Wolves of Mercy, reunited for the first time in years. The reunion was brief but emotional, warriors who had faced death together finding unexpected joy in reconnection. Then Sarah led them back to the Jeep, where Bob and Emily waited with barely concealed astonishment. "The cavalry has arrived," Sarah announced, a new confidence in her bearing. "Let me introduce you to the best combat medical team ever to serve." As introductions were made, Emily studied these newcomers with wide eyes, trying to reconcile their easy manner and normal appearance with what Sarah had just revealed. That these 6 people, including Sarah, had once formed an elite unit responsible for some of the most dangerous medical rescues in modern warfare. "We monitored the Steel Wolves' expansion across 3 states," Rebecca explained as they gathered in the tower's base. "When they moved toward Pine Ridge, we suspected they might cross paths with Sarah." "So you came to help fight them?" Emily asked, still struggling to process the situation. James shook his head. "We came to help our sister," he corrected gently. "The fighting is just a side effect." Carlos unrolled a topographical map of Pine Ridge and the surrounding area. "We've been gathering intelligence since crossing state lines. The Wolves have fortified the warehouse complex with sentries and crude early warning systems. They're expecting trouble, but not organized resistance." Marcus, whose massive frame seemed to fill the small space, rumbled, "They think they're dealing with scared civilians. They have no idea what's coming for them." Lisa activated a small tablet displaying surveillance photos of the warehouse. "We counted 42 members present as of sundown, at least 8 with military experience, though none particularly distinguished. Their leader, Ray Thompson, has constructed an intimidation-based power structure typical of outlaw organizations." Bob whistled softly. "You gathered all this intelligence in just hours?" Lisa's smile was predatory. "This is what we do." Sarah studied the map, military training engaging automatically as she assessed terrain, approaches, and defensive positions. "They'll move against the town soon, probably tomorrow. Ray can't afford to look weak in front of his people, and my presence represents a direct challenge." "We're still outnumbered," Emily pointed out, practical despite her limited tactical knowledge. "Numbers aren't everything," Sarah replied. "But you're right. We need to even the odds. Bob, what's the status on local volunteers?" The former sniper straightened. "Sheriffs vetted about a dozen men and women with military or hunting experience. Solid folks who can handle themselves and follow orders." "Good." Sarah turned to her former unit. "We'll need to train them quickly. Basic defensive tactics, communications, medical response." "Just like old times," James remarked with a grim smile, "minus the air support and satellite intelligence." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Speak for yourself." He patted his backpack. "I brought toys." As the night deepened, plans took shape. The Wolves of Mercy would coordinate with Sheriff Calloway and local volunteers to establish defensive positions throughout Pine Ridge. Emily would organize medical response teams at the hospital under Mike's supervision. Bob would establish observation posts in the surrounding hills, providing early warning of wolf movements. Sarah stood slightly apart, watching her worlds collide. The quiet life she'd sought in Pine Ridge, merging with the warrior past she'd tried to leave behind. There was no going back now. The nurse had reclaimed her role as combat commander, responsibilities settling onto her shoulders with familiar weight. Emily approached quietly, standing beside her at the tower window. "I still can't believe all of this is happening in Pine Ridge," she said softly. "It's like something from a movie." "The violence was already here," Sarah replied. "The wolves brought it. We're just responding." Emily studied her profile, seeing Sarah truly for the first time. "You never wanted this, did you, to fight again?" "No," Sarah's voice carried a weariness beyond physical exhaustion. "But sometimes we don't choose our battles. Sometimes they choose us." "Are you afraid?" Emily asked suddenly. The question caught Sarah off guard, honesty slipping past her usual defenses. "Yes," she admitted, "not of the fighting, of what comes after." "After?" "If we survive this," Sarah explained, "everything changes. I can't go back to being just a nurse. The town will never see me the same way again." She glanced at Emily. "Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. Understanding dawned in Emily's eyes. You're afraid of losing the peace you came here to find. Sarah nodded once, the simple gesture conveying volumes. Maybe, Emily suggested gently, peace isn't about where you are or what you're doing. Maybe it's about being true to who you really are. All parts of you, not just the ones that seem acceptable. Sarah turned to her, surprised by the insight from someone who had never experienced combat. Just a thought, Emily finished with a small smile, from someone who's only ever been a small-town nurse. Their moment of connection broke as James called them back to the planning session. But something had shifted between them, a friendship deepening into mutual respect that transcended their different backgrounds. As the group finalized their preparations, a sense of grim determination settled over them. They were few against many, defenders against aggressors, healers forced to become fighters. But they were no longer alone or unprepared. Pine Ridge had found its guardians, and the Steel Wolves were about to discover that their chosen prey had unexpectedly sharp teeth. The Wolves of Mercy moved through Pine Ridge like shadows at dawn, establishing observation points, communication lines, and defensive positions with the quiet efficiency of veteran operators. By mid-morning, they had transformed the small town into a prepared battlefield, though few residents would notice the subtle changes. Carlos and Rebecca installed motion sensors at key approaches, linked to a monitoring system in Sheriff Calloway's office. Marcus and Bob reinforced the hospital's vulnerable entry points under the guise of maintenance work. Lisa ghosted through town, mapping Steel Wolves' surveillance positions and identifying their intelligence gatherers. Sarah divided her time between coordination and maintaining her cover at the hospital, where rumors about her confrontation with Ray had already spread like wildfire. Staff members watched her with new eyes, some fearful, others admiring, all uncertain. "They're calling you the combat nurse now," Emily reported during a quiet moment between patients. "Half the town thinks you're some kind of superhero. The other half thinks you're going to bring hell down on us all." Sarah continued checking inventory with methodical precision. "And what do you think?" "I think," Emily replied carefully, "that Pine Ridge is lucky you chose to hide here." In his office at the hospital, Mike Reynolds coordinated medical preparations with James, both men falling easily into their roles as battlefield surgeons, despite the decades separating their war experiences. "We've prepared the basement as a secondary treatment area," Mike explained, reviewing floor plans. "Limited access points, backup generator, supply cache sufficient for 72 hours of trauma care." James nodded approvingly. "Just like the bunker in Baghdad, you've done this before." Mike's weathered face creased in a grim smile. "Different war, same principles. Protect the patients, maintain treatment capacity, prepare for the worst." At the sheriff's office, John briefed his 3 deputies and a select group of volunteers, former military, experienced hunters, people with the skills and temperament for what was coming. "This isn't about being heroes," he emphasized, his voice carrying the authority of a veteran ranger. "It's about protecting our community with minimal casualties on all sides." His eyes swept the room. "To be clear, we're acting in defense only. We don't start the fight, but we damn well intend to finish it." Frank Wilson, standing in the back with his arms crossed, spoke up. "What about the state police? Federal agencies? Shouldn't they be handling this?" "They've been notified," John replied, "but they're dealing with similar situations across 3 counties. Help will come, but not in time." He didn't add what everyone was thinking, that by the time outside help arrived, the battle for Pine Ridge would already be won or lost. Throughout the day, the town maintained a facade of normalcy, though observant residents noticed the subdued atmosphere, the increased presence of unfamiliar faces moving with military bearing, the hushed conversations that stopped when others approached. At the warehouse compound, Ray Thompson paced like a caged animal, rage and calculation warring in his expression as his lieutenants reported on the town's subtle changes. "Something's happening," Viper insisted, "people moving with purpose. The sheriff's gathered some of the local hunters, and there are strangers in town, professionals, not civilians." Ray's massive fist slammed into a support beam. "She called in reinforcements." His voice dripped with contempt and a hint of something new. Concern. "The Angel of Death is preparing for war." "We should pull out," another lieutenant suggested. Find easier territory. Ray rounded on him, eyes blazing. And show every rival outfit that we can be chased off by a nurse and some small-town cops? He shook his head violently. No, we finish this. Tonight. As dusk approached, Sarah returned to her cabin to find the Wolves of Mercy assembled in her living room. Weapons laid out for inspection, communication devices being checked. The transformation was complete. Civilian clothes exchanged for tactical gear, medical professionals reverted to combat operators, friends becoming a unit once more. Ray's gathering his people, Lisa reported without preamble. Scouts spotted vehicles arriving at the warehouse all afternoon. They're mobilizing for something big. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Timing? After midnight, most likely, Carlos replied, adjusting a communications headset. Classic pattern for these operations. Hit when the town is sleeping, overwhelm resistance before it can organize. They don't know we're already organized, Marcus rumbled, checking the action on a shotgun with practiced hands. Advantage us, Rebecca confirmed, studying a tablet displaying the town's defensive positions. All monitoring systems are active. Nothing moves toward Pine Ridge without our knowledge. James approached Sarah, medical kit in hand. Everyone's ready. Team leads are briefed. Hospital is secured as well as possible under the circumstances. He paused, studying her with the insight of someone who had served alongside her for years. How are you holding up, boss? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Ready? James nodded, accepting her answer at face value. Like old times. Not quite, Sarah replied, a hint of softness entering her voice. This time we're fighting for our home, not someone else's. The simple statement hung in the air, profound in its implications. This wasn't a deployment, a mission, an operation in some distant land for abstract strategic objectives. This was personal, defending a community they had chosen, people they had come to care for, a life they wanted to preserve. As night fell over Pine Ridge, the town grew quiet, streets emptying as word spread discreetly for residents to remain indoors. Lights went out early, businesses closed, an eerie stillness descending like the calm before a storm. At the hospital, Mike Reynolds made final preparations, his experienced hands moving with the same steady confidence they had shown in a MASH unit decades earlier. Emily organized supplies, her natural efficiency enhanced by Sarah's crash course in combat medicine. In the sheriff's office, John Calloway distributed weapons and radio equipment to his makeshift force, his voice calm as he issued final instructions. Remember your zones, maintain communication discipline, and follow the plan. We're not soldiers, but tonight we're all that stands between our home and those who would take it from us. And in the darkness outside town, Sarah Blackwood, nurse, warrior, protector, took position with her team, watching the road where intelligence suggested the steel wolves would approach. Her Beretta rested in its holster, a combat knife strapped to her thigh, medical supplies secured in pouches at her waist. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she, who had come to Pine Ridge seeking escape from violence, now stood as the town's primary defender against it. That her attempt to leave the warrior behind had instead placed her once more on the front lines of conflict. But as she scanned the horizon, Sarah felt something unexpected. Clarity. The division she had tried to maintain between the healer and the fighter, between past and present, between who she had been and who she wanted to be, dissolved into something simpler and more powerful. She was Sarah Blackwood, combat medic, the angel of death, and Pine Ridge was under her protection. The battle for a small Wyoming town was about to begin. Midnight in Pine Ridge brought an unnatural silence. No crickets chirped, no night birds called, as if nature itself sensed the impending violence and had fallen quiet in anticipation. A heavy mist clung to the valleys and streets, transforming familiar landscapes into something otherworldly and uncertain. In the hospital basement, now converted to an auxiliary medical facility, Mike Reynolds moved among makeshift treatment stations, checking supplies with the methodical efficiency ingrained during his MASH days. Despite his 65 years, his movements remained precise, muscle memory from another war reactivating after decades of dormancy. Emily organized medications alongside James Doc Miller, their different backgrounds, small-town nurse and elite combat medic, finding common ground in the shared language of emergency medicine. Triage tags, James explained, laying out color-coded cards. Black for expectant, red for immediate, yellow for delayed, green for minimal. Just like we practiced. Emily nodded, committing the system to memory. You've done this before, for real, I mean. More times than I care to remember, James admitted, his usual humor subdued. But never on American soil. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Tonight will be different for all of us. Upstairs, a skeleton crew maintained normal operations, caring for the few patients who couldn't be evacuated. The lights remained dim, window blinds drawn tightly, presenting as small a target as possible while preserving the hospital's function. Outside, darkness cloaked the town, broken only by sparse street lights and the occasional flash of a radio handset. Sheriff Calloway's deputies and vetted volunteers manned defensive positions at strategic intersections, concealed in shadows, weapons ready but secured. This wasn't an ambush. It was a defensive perimeter, designed to channel the coming attack along predicted routes. On the outskirts, the Wolves of Mercy had established observation posts connected by secure communications. Lisa Ghost Chen lay motionless in a shallow depression, overlooking the main approach road, her breathing slow and controlled, her body seemingly part of the landscape itself. Rebecca Raven Davis monitored sensor feeds from a concealed position behind the town's water tower, her analytical mind tracking patterns and movements. Marcus Tank Johnson and Carlos Shadow Mendez had established blocking positions at the secondary approaches, their contrasting physical presences, massive and slight, complementing tactical strengths honed through years of joint operations. And Sarah Blackwood, the angel of death reborn, stood on the roof of the sheriff's office with Bob Miller, scanning the perimeter through night vision equipment. The former nurse had fully transformed, utility belt carrying medical supplies alongside combat equipment, Beretta secure in its holster, earpiece connecting her to the defensive network spread throughout Pine Ridge. Movement on County Road 16, Lisa's voice reported through the comm system, her tone emotionless and professional. Multiple vehicles, headlights off, approximately 2 miles out and approaching. Engine signatures consistent with motorcycles and at least 2 larger vehicles. Acknowledged, Sarah responded, her own voice similarly detached, the voice of a commander, not a caregiver. All stations, condition yellow. Confirm positions. One by one, team leaders reported readiness, a chorus of affirmations in military shorthand that would have been unintelligible to most Pine Ridge residents just days earlier. Remember, Sarah broadcast to all positions, defensive operations only. We don't engage unless they initiate. This is still America, and these are Seattle citizens, however misguided. The distinction mattered. This wasn't a foreign battlefield where different rules applied. This was home. John Calloway joined her on the roof, night vision binoculars revealing more details as the Steel Wolves convoy approached through the mist. I count 32 motorcycles, 1 pickup truck in what looks like a panel van, he reported. Armed personnel visible in the truck bed. Sarah nodded, mental calculations running automatically. They've committed almost their entire force. Ray's going all in. Makes sense from his perspective, John observed. He can't afford to look weak. Better to overwhelm resistance quickly with superior numbers. Except he doesn't know what he's actually facing. Sarah's lips curved in a grim smile that held no humor. His intelligence is incomplete. The convoy halted at the town limits, engines idling with threatening rumbles that carried through the night air. Ray Thompson's massive silhouette separated from the group, standing momentarily outlined against the headlights of the truck behind him as he surveyed the apparently sleeping town. Classic siege mentality, Sarah murmured, recognizing the tactical approach. He expects resistance from the sheriff's office and the hospital, the 2 centers of authority. He'll divide his forces to neutralize both simultaneously. John nodded, just as we predicted. Below in the sheriff's office, Frank Wilson distributed final equipment to the civilian volunteers. Simple communications devices, medical kits, and defensive weapons. His weathered face reflected none of his 62 years as he moved with the purpose and precision of his Green Beret days. Remember your training, he instructed quietly. Stay in your assigned zones. Maintain communication discipline. If you're compromised, fall back to secondary positions. This isn't about being heroes. It's about protecting our town. The minutes stretched with excruciating slowness, tension building as the Steel Wolves remained stationary at the town limits. Then, a single command from Ray sent motorcycles fanning out along side streets, establishing a perimeter of their own, while the main force began a slow advance toward the center of Pine Ridge. "They're moving," Lisa reported through the comm system. Sarah straightened, the moment of decision upon them. "All stations, prepare for contact. Remember, we protect this town and its people. Everything else is secondary." As if in response to her words, the night erupted with the roar of motorcycle engines revving to full throttle. The Steel Wolves surged forward, abandoning stealth for the psychological impact of sound and fury, their headlights suddenly blazing to life as they charged into Pine Ridge. The battle for a small Wyoming town had begun. The Steel Wolves' initial assault followed classic intimidation tactics: maximum noise, visible weapons, an overwhelming presence designed to paralyze resistance through shock and awe. Motorcycles thundered down Main Street, riders firing weapons into the air, while others peeled off toward key locations throughout town. From her position, Sarah watched the deployment with the analytical detachment of a veteran commander, noting patterns and vulnerabilities. They're splitting as expected. Primary force toward the sheriff's office, secondary toward the hospital, tertiary units establishing blocking positions at major intersections. Through her earpiece, Lisa's voice remained calm. "Trigger points activated on routes 2 and 3. They've entered the funnel." The funnel was Sarah's design, a series of subtle barriers and obstacles strategically placed to channel the wolves' movements along predictable paths, past prepared defensive positions, and into areas where civilian exposure was minimized. Road construction signs, strategically abandoned vehicles, and other innocuous impediments now serve tactical purposes their creators never intended. "Execute blackout," Sarah commanded. Across Pine Ridge, street lights extinguished simultaneously, plunging the town into darkness and immediately nullifying the wolves' night vision. The motorcycles slowed, riders momentarily disoriented by the sudden transition from illuminated targets to invisible terrain. In that moment of hesitation, the defenders of Pine Ridge revealed their first surprise. "Roadblocks active," Carlos reported, as previously hidden barriers rose from concealment at key positions, blocking the wolves' advance and separating their forces into manageable segments. The lead motorcycle group, including Ray Thompson, found themselves isolated near the town square, cut off from their reinforcements by barriers that hadn't existed moments earlier. Confusion rippled through their formation. The expected resistance from the sheriff's office hadn't materialized, and instead, they faced darkness and unexpected obstacles. "What the hell?" Ray's voice carried through the night, frustration evident. "Spread out! Find Calloway!" The wolves dismounted, weapons drawn, moving with the awkward caution of those more accustomed to intimidating than actually fighting. Their leather creaked in the silence, boots scraping on asphalt as they advanced toward the darkened sheriff's office. "Hold positions," Sarah instructed through the comm system, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let them come to us." Ray reached the sheriff's office first, finding it seemingly deserted. No lights, no movement, no sign of the law enforcement presence he'd expected to confront. His confusion visibly increased, tactical certainty replaced by growing unease. "It's a trap," he suddenly declared, instincts finally catching up to reality. "Fall back to the bikes!" Too late. From concealed positions surrounding the town square, focused beams of light activated simultaneously, illuminating the Steel Wolves in harsh white circles while leaving their perimeter in darkness. The psychological effect was immediate: exposed, vulnerable, unable to identify targets while themselves becoming perfect ones. "Steel Wolves," John Calloway's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "This is Sheriff John Calloway. You are surrounded and outpositioned. Lower your weapons and surrender peacefully." Ray's response was predictable, a burst of automatic fire toward the source of the voice, bullets striking harmlessly against the reinforced position John had established hours earlier. "That's your answer?" Sarah murmured, watching through night vision as Ray organized his men into a defensive circle. "So be it." She keyed her comm. "Phase 2, non-lethal engagement authorized." Across the square, Marcus deployed the first countermeasure, a modified flashbang grenade that detonated with disorienting light but minimal concussion, designed to stun without potentially harming civilians in nearby buildings. The Steel Wolves reacted chaotically, some dropping to the ground, others firing wildly into the darkness. From another position, Rebecca triggered remote smoke dispensers, filling the square with a thick, obscuring cloud that further disoriented the increasingly panicked gang members. Their advantage in numbers meant nothing when they couldn't identify targets or maintain unit cohesion. "This isn't a small-town sheriff's department," Ray shouted, realization dawning too late. "It's a military operation." In the confusion, several wolves broke formation, running for the perceived safety of side streets, directly into the waiting arms of Frank's civilian defense teams, who subdued and secured them with minimal force. At the hospital, the second wolf assault group met similar resistance. As they approached the darkened building, motion sensors triggered defensive measures, security shutters descending over entrances and windows, blocking access points and transforming the hospital into an impromptu fortress. "Hospital secure," Mike reported through the comm system. Wolves attempting breach at the emergency entrance, but encountering reinforced barriers. Inside, Emily and James maintained calm efficiency, reassuring patients while monitoring the defensive perimeter. The sounds of attempted intrusion, motorcycle engines revving against barricades, frustrated shouts, occasional gunfire, created a surreal backdrop to their medical preparations. "How long will the barriers hold?" Emily asked, arranging trauma equipment with steady hands that belied her fear. James checked a reinforced door as something heavy slammed against it from outside. "Long enough," he assured her. "These guys aren't siege specialists. They're used to targets that don't fight back." Back at the town square, Ray Thompson had finally grasped the magnitude of his miscalculation. His men, disoriented and divided, were being systematically isolated and neutralized by an invisible force that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Fall back," he commanded, abandoning his original objective. "Regroup at the trucks." But retreat routes had already been compromised. The motorcycles they'd left behind now had deflated tires, courtesy of Carlos's infiltration during the confusion. The truck they'd arrived in refused to start, its ignition system disabled by specialized equipment that left no visible trace. Ray's frustration erupted in a bellow of rage as he fired another useless burst into the darkness. "Show yourselves, cowards!" "Careful what you wish for," Sarah whispered, though only John beside her could hear. She keyed her comm once more. "All units, continue containment procedures. Hospital team, status?" "Second assault group retreating," Lisa reported from her new position near the hospital. 4 captured, remainder falling back toward town square. They're consolidating with the primary group. Sarah nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. Just as expected, they're gathering for a final stand. The battle was proceeding according to plan, the Steel Wolves' superior numbers negated by strategy, their aggression channeled and contained, their cohesion systematically undermined. It wasn't an annihilation, but a controlled neutralization, minimizing casualties on both sides while achieving the primary objective, protecting Pine Ridge. Yet Sarah knew the most dangerous phase still lay ahead. Ray Thompson, cornered and humiliated, would become increasingly unpredictable. The controlled dismantling of his attack would push him toward desperate measures, and desperate men rarely surrendered quietly. "Be ready," she instructed her teams. "The real fight is just beginning." The secondary Steel Wolves assault group, thwarted in their initial attack on the hospital, had fallen back to regroup. Now, under the direction of Viper, Ray's lieutenant, they prepared a more determined approach. "They've hot-wired 2 pickup trucks from the hardware store parking lot," Rebecca reported through the comm system, monitoring from her position on a nearby rooftop. "Loading them with personnel. Appears they're planning to use the vehicles as battering rams against the hospital's main entrance." Inside the hospital's command center, formerly the administrative conference room, Mike and Emily exchanged concerned glances as they monitored the security feeds. The hospital's defenses, while substantial, weren't designed to withstand vehicular assault. "We need reinforcements," Mike said into his headset. "The barricades won't hold against trucks." Sarah's voice replied immediately, calm but authoritative. "Marcus and Carlos are en route, ETA 3 minutes. Hospital team, implement contingency delta. James nodded to Mike, both men understanding the directive. Contingency delta, the evacuation of critical patients to the reinforced basement while deploying the hospital's final defensive measures. Emily, start moving patients now, Mike ordered. Priority sequence as rehearsed. As Emily coordinated the medical staff in rapid patient relocation, James opened a locked cabinet in the command center, revealing specialized equipment that hadn't been part of a standard hospital inventory since the building's construction. Cold War paranoia finally proves useful, Mike remarked with grim humor, helping James remove heavy steel panels designed to reinforce critical infrastructure against potential bomb blasts. These were installed during the missile crisis. Never thought they'd actually be needed. Outside, the two stolen trucks revved their engines, headlights illuminating the hospital's main entrance, as wolves armed with shotguns and assault rifles prepared for what they believed would be a decisive breach. On my mark, Viper commanded, orchestrating the dual vehicle assault. 3, 2, 1, go! The trucks accelerated simultaneously, bearing down on the hospital entrance with increasing speed, only to be met with a surprise defense. Marcus and Carlos, arriving just in time, deployed a modified spike strip across the approach, instantly shredding the truck's tires and sending both vehicles spinning out of control. The lead truck slammed into a concrete planter, while the second veered sharply and crashed into a parked ambulance. Disoriented wolves spilled from the disabled vehicles, some injured from the crash impact, others disoriented but still combat capable. Viper, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, rallied his forces with angry shouts. Breach the doors! Use the shotguns! From concealed positions around the hospital perimeter, Lisa and a team of local volunteers emerged, engaging the wolves with carefully aimed non-lethal rounds, rubber bullets and beanbag projectiles designed to incapacitate without killing. The precision of their fire demonstrated training far beyond civilian standards, targeting extremities and avoiding potentially fatal shots even in the chaos of engagement. Inside, James monitored the defense from the security feeds, directing response teams through his headset. East entrance compromised, wolves breaching secondary doors. Medical staff clear upper floors and proceed to basement immediately. Mike grabbed a trauma kit, moving toward the threatened sector with surprising agility for his age. I'm heading to intercept. We can't let them reach the patient areas. Negative, James countered, physically blocking his path. You're our primary surgeon. You stay protected. His expression softened slightly. Sarah's orders, Doc. You're too valuable to risk. Before Mike could argue, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the corridor as the wolves finally breached an auxiliary entrance. Shouts and the crash of equipment being overturned signaled their violent advance through the hospital's ground floor. They're inside, Emily reported from the basement, her voice tense but controlled. All critical patients secured in the pre-listed area. James checked his equipment, a combination of medical supplies and defensive tools that reflected his dual training. Defensive positions, as planned. Remember, these are still Americans. Minimal force necessary to protect patients and staff. The wolves moved through the hospital corridors with the chaotic energy of men unaccustomed to actual combat, destroying equipment and searching for targets with more enthusiasm than discipline. They had expected to find a typical rural hospital, vulnerable, undefended, an easy conquest. Instead, they encountered darkness, emptiness, and the unsettling sense of walking into a prepared battlefield. Find the drugs, Viper ordered, his voice echoing in the darkened hallways. And find that bitch nurse who humiliated Ray. She's priority one. As they approached the central nurses' station, motion sensors triggered the hospital's final defensive measure. Emergency sprinklers activated, but instead of water, they dispensed a non-toxic smoke compound that immediately filled the corridors with disorienting, visibility-reducing haze. Through this artificial fog, James and his defensive team moved with practiced efficiency, engaging the disoriented wolves with precision takedowns developed during years of operating in hostile territory. One by one, the intruders found themselves subdued, disarmed, and secured, sometimes never seeing their captors at all. Viper, separated from his men in the confusion, stumbled into what appeared to be an empty treatment room, seeking momentary shelter from the chaos. As the door closed behind him, lights suddenly activated, temporarily blinding him. When his vision cleared, he found himself face to face with James Doc Miller, whose pleasant smile contrasted sharply with the combat stance he maintained. "Let me guess," James said conversationally. "You're looking for the pharmacy." He shrugged apologetically. "I'm afraid all our controlled substances have been relocated. Hospital policy during emergencies." Viper raised his weapon only to find it expertly removed from his grasp before his finger could reach the trigger. The disarm was so smooth, so professionally executed, that he stood momentarily frozen in shock. "What the hell are you people?" he managed finally. James's smile remained unchanged. "Healthcare professionals. Very, very specialized healthcare professionals." Outside, the tide had definitively turned. Lisa's team had secured the hospital perimeter, neutralizing or capturing most of the attacking force. Those few who escaped were retreating toward the town center, abandoning both their mission and their wounded comrades. "Hospital secure," James reported through the comm system. 14 wolves captured, 6 wounded requiring treatment, remainder retreating. No casualties among staff or patients. Sarah's voice responded with calm approval. "Well done. Treat their wounded according to standard protocols. Secure prisoners for law enforcement handover." In the basement command center, Emily allowed herself a moment of relief, slumping against a wall as the immediate danger passed. Around her, medical staff attended to patients with the renewed confidence of those who had faced a threat and emerged victorious. Mike approached, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did well," he said simply. "Very well." Emily managed a shaky smile. "I never thought nursing school would prepare me for a gang war." "It didn't," Mike replied, "but you adapted. That's what makes a good medical professional, the ability to face the unexpected and still fulfill your duty of care." He glanced around the improvised treatment area, where staff now efficiently treated wounded wolves alongside regular patients. Even when the unexpected involves treating those who came to harm you. The hospital had held, its patients protected, its function preserved even under direct assault. But elsewhere in Pine Ridge, the final confrontation was still unfolding. As Ray Thompson, his forces diminished but his rage intact, prepared for a last desperate stand. The remains of Ray Thompson's once intimidating force had consolidated in the town square, using overturned vehicles as makeshift barricades. From approximately 40 original combatants, fewer than 20 remained. The others captured, injured, or fled into the surrounding countryside where Bob's observation teams tracked their disorganized retreat. Through night vision equipment, Sarah observed Ray moving among his men, his gestures increasingly erratic, his leadership deteriorating as the reality of their situation became undeniable. They had come to terrorize a small town and instead found themselves outmaneuvered, outfought, and now surrounded by an enemy they still couldn't fully identify. "He's losing control," John noted, watching alongside Sarah from their elevated position. "That makes him more dangerous, not less." Sarah nodded agreement. Cornered animals fight hardest. She studied the barricade configuration, assessing vulnerabilities and potential approaches. "We need to end this quickly, before he decides civilian hostages are his best remaining option." She keyed her comm unit. "All teams prepare for final phase. Precision engagement, non-lethal protocols maintain. Marcus, status?" "In position with Carlos," came the immediate response. "East approach secured, ready on your command." "Rebecca?" "Monitoring all communications." They're arguing among themselves. Some want to surrender, others following Ray's insistence on fighting. Internal cohesion deteriorating rapidly. Sarah made her decision. "Execute containment final. I'll take point on negotiation." John's eyebrows raised slightly. "You're going in personally?" "Ray wants the angel of death," Sarah replied, her expression hardening. "Let's not disappoint him." She checked her equipment one final time. Beretta secure but not drawn, medical kit accessible, comm unit tested. This would be a calculated risk, but one with potentially significant reward, ending the conflict without further bloodshed. "Cover me," she instructed. "If this goes sideways, you have command." Before John could protest further, Sarah descended from their position, moving through shadows toward the town square, with the fluid grace of someone long accustomed to operating in hostile territory. Through her earpiece, she monitored the coordinated movements of her teams as they established final containment positions around the Wolves' barricade. At her signal, focused spotlights activated once more, illuminating the steel wolves' position while leaving the surrounding area in darkness, a psychological tactic that emphasized their vulnerability while concealing the strength arrayed against them. Sarah's voice, amplified through tactical speakers, echoed across the square. Ray Thompson, this is Sarah Blackwood. Your position is surrounded. Your hospital assault team has been neutralized. You have no viable escape routes. Inside their makeshift fortress, the wolves reacted with a mixture of defiance and fear. Some raised weapons toward the darkness. Others looked to Ray for direction. Their once imposing leader stood rigidly in the center, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Show yourself," he bellowed. "Or are you too much of a coward to face me directly?" Sarah stepped into the edge of the light, her silhouette clearly visible but positioned behind sufficient cover to protect against impulsive gunfire. "I'm here, Ray, just as I was at the hospital when you decided slapping a nurse and tearing her uniform was acceptable behavior." Murmurs spread among the remaining wolves as Sarah continued, her voice carrying easily in the night air. "You have exactly one chance to end this without further casualties. Surrender your weapons, release any hostages, and submit to lawful arrest." Ray's laughter held an edge of hysteria. "You think I'm going to surrender to a nurse and some small-town cops? Do you know who I am? Who the Steel Wolves are?" "I know exactly who you are," Sarah replied evenly. "A schoolyard bully who never grew up, leading men who mistake cruelty for strength and intimidation for power." Her voice hardened. "And I know who the Steel Wolves are, or rather, were. After tonight, your organization is finished in Wyoming." Ray's response was predictably violent, a burst of automatic fire towards Sarah's position, bullets striking harmlessly against the reinforced barrier she stood behind. "Wrong choice," Sarah said quietly, though only her team could hear. She keyed her comm. "Execute." Simultaneously, multiple non-lethal countermeasures activated around the wolves' position. Smoke canisters deployed, obscuring vision within their barricade. Focus sonic devices emitted disorienting frequencies that induced nausea and discomfort without permanent damage. From concealed positions, Marcus and Carlos launched precision tear gas into calculated points within the defensive perimeter. Chaos erupted among the wolves, their already fragile cohesion completely shattering. Some fired blindly into the darkness. Others attempted to flee. Still others turned on each other in growing panic. Ray shouted contradictory orders that went largely ignored as his authority collapsed alongside his tactical position. Through it all, Shura monitored from cover, directing her teams with the calm precision that had made her legendary in combat zones across the world. East Sector breach, 2 targets fleeing toward Main Street. West barricade collapsing, multiple surrenders in progress. Within minutes, the majority of the remaining wolves had either surrendered or been neutralized by precision, non-lethal fire from the surrounding teams. Only Ray Thompson and 3 of his most loyal followers maintained resistance, retreating toward the hardware store with desperation evident in their movements. "They're headed for Frank's store," John observed through the comm system. "Possible hostage situation developing." Sarah's response was immediate. "I'm in pursuit. Lisa, parallel approach through the alley. Carlos, rooftop coverage." She moved through the dissipating smoke with practiced ease, her footsteps nearly silent despite her rapid pace. Years of battlefield experience guided her movements, always in cover, never silhouetted, presenting the smallest possible target while maintaining maximum situational awareness. Ahead, Ray and his remaining men breached the hardware store's side entrance, the sound of splintering wood echoing in the night air. Sarah paused at the corner of the building, assessing options while Lisa moved into position on the opposite approach. "Movement inside," Lisa reported through the comm. 4 wolves plus 1 civilian. Frank Wilson. They appear to be taking him hostage. Sarah's expression tightened. "Frank can handle himself, but we can't risk civilian casualties. We need eyes inside." "Already on it," Carlos responded. From his elevated position, he deployed a small reconnaissance drone through a ventilation opening, its camera feed transmitting to the team's tactical displays. The interior of the hardware store appeared as a maze of shelving, tools, and building materials, terrain that offered both concealment and potential weapons for all involved. Frank stood with apparent submission as Ray held a pistol to his head, though his eyes remained alert, scanning for opportunities. I want vehicles and clear passage out of town, Ray shouted, correctly assuming that his actions were being monitored. Or the old man dies first, then we start burning this town to the ground. Frank, despite his precarious position, maintained remarkable composure. At 62, the former Green Beret showed none of the fear expected from a civilian hostage, a detail Ray, in his escalating panic, failed to notice. You have 30 seconds to respond, Ray continued, pressing the weapon harder against Frank's temple. Or his blood is on your hands. Sarah assessed the situation with clinical detachment, calculating angles, distances, and probabilities. 4 hostiles, 1 friendly, confined space with multiple obstructions. Standard hostage protocol, ineffective due to civilian proximity. A solution crystallized, unorthodox, high risk, but with potential for minimum casualties. Frank knows the code phrase, she noted. If he recognizes the tactic. Decision made, Sarah Keeter calm. All units, hold positions. I'm implementing Kingfisher protocol. She removed her tactical gear, retaining only her concealed sidearm, and stepped into view at the store's front entrance. Ray, she called out, hands visible and apparently empty. Let's talk face to face, just you and me. Inside, Ray's expression shifted from surprise to malicious satisfaction. The angel of death surrenders. Send her in, lone and unarmed. Dar entered slowly, presenting the appearance of compliance while maintaining full awareness of the tactical environment. The hardware store's interior offered multiple advantages to someone with her training: confined spaces, improvised weapons, and numerous potential cover positions. Stop there, Ray ordered, when she reached the center of the main aisle. Where I can see you, Sarah complied, her posture deliberately non-threatening. Her gaze met Frank's, and recognition flickered in the older man's eyes as she subtly positioned her hands in a gesture that would appear nervous to observers, but conveyed specific meaning to someone with shared training. You've lost, Ray, she said calmly. Your men are captured or fled. The state police are en route. There's no scenario where this ends well for you, unless you surrender now. Ray's laughter held the brittle edge of a man pushed beyond rational calculation. Look around you, Angel. I've got a hostage and 3 men with the automatic weapons. You're alone and unarmed. His grip on Frank tightened. I'd say I'm the one making terms now. Appearances can be deceiving, Sarah replied, the phrase seemingly casual but carrying specific meaning to Frank. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one holding the gun. Frank's nearly imperceptible nod confirmed his understanding. The stage was set. You know what I think? Ray continued, emboldened by her apparent vulnerability. I think the angel of death's reputation is just that. Reputation. Stories to scare people. But here you are, just a woman trying to play soldier. Sarah allowed a small, cold smile to touch at her lips. Kingfisher, she said clearly. In that instant, several things happened simultaneously. Frank, recognizing the code word, went completely limp, dropping his full weight suddenly and unexpectedly. Ray, unprepared for the maneuver, instinctively adjusted his grip, creating a momentary gap between the weapon and Frank's head. Sarah exploded into motion, covering the distance between them with explosive speed that belied her calm demeanor seconds earlier. Her first strike targeted Ray's weapon hand with surgical precision, deflecting the pistol away from Frank's head as it discharged, the bullet harmlessly embedding in a nearby shelf. The 3 remaining wolves reacted belatedly, hampered by surprise in their positions behind Ray. By the time they raised their weapons, Sarah had already closed with Ray, her body positioning, using his bulk as a shield against his own men. Frank, far from the helpless civilian he'd appeared, rolled clear of the confrontation with the practiced movement of someone long experienced in combat situations. In a fluid continuation, he swept the legs of the nearest wolf, sending the man crashing to the floor as his weapon clattered away. The hardware store erupted into close-quarters combat, a domain where Sarah's specialized training provided decisive advantage. Each movement flowed into the next with lethal efficiency, neutralizing threats without excessive force, disarming rather than destroying when possible. One wolf charged with a switchblade, only to find his arm locked and redirected, his own momentum carrying him face-first into a display of paint cans. Another fired wildly, bullets embedding and shelving as Sarah ducked beneath his line of fire, closing distance before he could correct his aim and delivering a precision strike to pressure points that left his arm temporarily useless. Frank, belying his 62 years, moved with the muscle memory of decades of special operations training, efficiently neutralizing his opponent with minimum force and maximum effect. Within seconds, two of the three subordinate wolves lay incapacitated on the hardware store floor. Only Ray Thompson remained standing, his massive frame backing away as his perceived advantage evaporated. He reached behind a counter, emerging with a fire axe gripped in his hands like a lifeline. "Stay back," he warned, swinging the improvised weapon in wild arcs that forced Sarah to maintain distance. "It's over, Ray," she said, circling cautiously, looking for an opening. "Put it down before someone gets hurt." "It's not over until I say it's over," Ray bellowed, desperation evident in every movement. The control and calculation that had built his criminal empire had evaporated, replaced by primal fear masked as aggression. "You think you've beaten me? The Steel Wolves? We'll burn this town to the ground for this." Sarah's expression remained impassive, conserving energy, while Ray exhausted himself with increasingly erratic swings. "The Steel Wolves are finished in Wyoming. Your men are captured or fled. You have no power here anymore." With a roar of incoherent rage, Ray charged, the axe raised for a killing blow, exactly the opening Sarah had anticipated. She sidestepped it with precise timing, using his momentum against him while simultaneously striking nerve clusters that sent paralyzing pain through his weapon arm. The axe clattered to the floor as Ray stumbled forward, off balance and vulnerable. Sarah completed the takedown with clinical efficiency, leveraging his weight and momentum to drive him to the ground with controlled force. Ray Thompson, leader of the Steel Wolves, terror of small towns across 3 states, found himself face down on the hardware store floor, immobilized by a woman half his size through techniques he couldn't comprehend, let alone counter. "It's called combatives," Sarah explained conversationally, maintaining the hold with minimal effort. "Something they teach people like me for situations like this." Frank secured the other neutralized wolves with zip ties from a nearby shelf, moving with the calm efficiency of someone for whom such activities were once routine. Through the comm system, Sarah directed her teams to converge on the hardware store for prisoner transfer and security. As John Calloway entered with deputies to take custody of Ray Thompson, the biker leader's defiance had collapsed into sullen silence. The realization of complete defeat was finally setting in. Not just personal defeat, but the dismantling of everything he had built through intimidation and violence. "Sarah Blackwood," John announced formally, though a smile tugged at his lips. "I'm deputizing you under emergency powers. Would you do the honors?" Sarah secured Ray's hands with official restraints, reciting Miranda rights with precise accuracy. As she helped him to his feet, their eyes met one final time. "You came to the wrong town, Ray," she said quietly. "Some wolves are bigger than others." Outside, the first light of dawn touched Pine Ridge as state police vehicles finally arrived, their flashing lights illuminating a town forever changed by the night's events. The battle was over. The healing could begin. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Pine Ridge Memorial Hospital, where the evidence of the previous night's violence was already being erased through the determined efforts of staff and volunteers. Damaged equipment was repaired or replaced, barricades dismantled, and the rhythms of normal healthcare gradually restored. In a private room, Sarah Blackwood methodically stitched a laceration on Marcus's forearm, her hands steady and precise, despite having been awake for more than 36 hours. The big man winced slightly but maintained a stoic expression. "Just like Kandahar," he remarked with a wry smile, "except with better lighting and fewer scorpions." Sarah tied off the final suture with practiced efficiency. "And better coffee," she added, a rare hint of humor softening her features. Throughout the hospital, similar scenes played out as the Wolves of Mercy attended to injuries sustained during the defense of Pine Ridge. Rebecca analyzed casualty data, while Lisa assisted Emily in treating civilians and captured wolves alike with the same professional care. James worked alongside Mike in surgery, 2 generations of combat medicine finding common ground in their shared dedication to healing. The final tally told a remarkable story. Despite the scale of the confrontation, not a single fatality had occurred on either side. The defensive strategy, emphasizing control and containment rather than destruction, had achieved its primary objective, protecting Pine Ridge while minimizing harm to all involved. State police investigators moved through the hospital and town, documenting evidence and taking statements with increasing amazement as the full scope of the night's events became clear. What had begun as a routine response to reported gang violence had evolved into the discovery of an organized criminal network spanning 3 states, and its systematic dismantling by forces the investigators were still struggling to fully identify. In the hospital cafeteria, Sarah found a moment of relative quiet, nursing a cup of coffee while reviewing after-action reports on a tablet. Emily joined her, carrying her own coffee in the weary satisfaction of someone who had faced extraordinary challenges and emerged stronger. "The last Wolf patient has been transferred to state police custody," Emily reported, sliding into the seat across from Sarah. "Prognosis good for all of them, even Ray's brother with the femoral artery damage." Sarah nodded appreciation. "You did exceptional work under unprecedented conditions." "I had good teachers," Emily replied with a tired smile, "though I'm pretty sure this wasn't covered in nursing school." When they shared a moment of companionable silence, the kind that often forms between those who have faced danger together. Finally, Emily asked the question that hung unspoken between them. "What happens now, to you, to your team, to Pine Ridge?" Sarah set down her coffee, considering her response carefully. "The wolves of mercy will disperse again. They have lives to return to, lives they built after service, just as I tried to do here." She looked up, meeting Emily's gaze directly. "As for me, that depends on whether Pine Ridge still has a place for someone like me." "You saved this town," Emily said simply. "I also brought war to it," Sarah countered. "My presence here, my past, they're what drew the Steel Wolves' attention in the first place." "That's not true," Mike Reynolds interjected, joining them with his own coffee. At 65, he showed the fatigue of the prolonged crisis, but his eyes remained clear and determined. "Ray Thompson targeted Pine Ridge because he thought it was vulnerable, an easy conquest. If you hadn't been here, they would have succeeded." He placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture of connection she would have shied away from months earlier, but now accepted with quiet gratitude. "This town doesn't need an angel of death, but it could use Sarah Blackwood, nurse, protector, and now, whether you like it or not, a member of this community." Before Sarah could respond, John Calloway approached their table, his expression uncharacteristically lighthearted, despite the bandage visible at his temple, a souvenir from the night's action. "State police just finished their preliminary investigation," he reported. "They've uncovered evidence linking the Steel Wolves to narcotics distribution across 3 states. Ray Thompson is facing federal charges that will keep him behind bars for decades." "And the town?" Sarah asked, the question encompassing concerns too complex for simple words. John understood nonetheless. "Recovering, shocked certainly, changed definitely, but standing tall." He smiled slightly. "The mayor's already talking about a community recognition ceremony for the local heroes who defended Pine Ridge." Sarah's expression showed clear discomfort at the prospect. "That's not necessary or wise. The less attention drawn to specific individuals, the better." "I agree," John said, "which is why I suggested a general community recognition instead. The full truth of what happened last night doesn't need to become public record." Relief flickered across Sarah's features. Despite the decisive victory, she had no desire for renewed public attention. The angel of death was the identity she had hoped to leave behind, not resurrect. As the day progressed, Pine Ridge began the process of returning to normal, though normal had been permanently redefined by the events of the previous night. Storefronts reopened, albeit with plywood covering broken windows. Children returned cautiously to playgrounds, under the watchful eyes of parents who had gained a new appreciation for the fragility of small-town peace. At Sarah's cabin, the Wolves of Mercy prepared for departure, packing tactical gear alongside civilian clothing with the practiced efficiency of those accustomed to rapid deployment and equally rapid withdrawal. "You could come with us," Lisa suggested as she secured equipment in a nondescript duffel bag. "The team has never been the same without you." Sarah shook her head, a small smile softening her refusal. "My war is over, Ghost. Has been for years, whether I admitted it or not." "And this?" Lisa gestured toward the town visible through the cabin window. "This wasn't war?" This was different, Sarah replied after a thoughtful pause. This wasn't about national interests or strategic objectives. This was about protecting something tangible, something mine. Understanding dawned in Lisa's eyes. You've found home. The simple phrase captured a complex truth that Sarah had only just begun to acknowledge. Pine Ridge, which had started as merely a southern hiding place, had become something she was willing to fight for. Not as a soldier following orders, but as a member of a community defending what was hers. The wolves of mercy departed as they had arrived, quietly, efficiently, leaving minimal trace of their presence. Only Sarah remained at the edge of town, watching their vehicles disappear into the distance with emotions too complicated for simple categorization. She was still standing there when Mike's truck pulled alongside her, window rolling down to reveal his weathered face. Need a ride back to town? Sarah hesitated only briefly before accepting, sliding into the passenger seat with a sense of crossing some invisible threshold. They drove in comfortable silence for several minutes before Mike spoke again. The hospital board met this morning, he said, eyes on the road ahead. They've approved funding for an expanded emergency department with enhanced security features and a dedicated trauma team. He glanced sideways. They're hoping the current head nurse will consider taking charge of the project. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Even knowing who she really is? Especially knowing who she really is, Mike countered. Experience matters, Sarah, in medicine and in life. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I'm retiring next year. The hospital will need strong leadership going forward. The implication hung between them, not just professional advancement, but a commitment to remain in Pine Ridge long term, to build something lasting rather than simply passing through. I'll consider it, Sarah said finally, neither accepting nor refusing. Mike smiled, recognizing the response as progress for someone who had spent years avoiding attachment and permanence. That's all I ask. As they drove through town, Sarah observed the activity with new eyes, seeing not just a small community in Wyoming, but a place that had faced darkness and emerged stronger. Frank Wilson directed volunteers repairing his hardware store, sharing laughs despite the damage to his business. Emily coordinated a makeshift health clinic in the town square, treating minor injuries and checking on elderly residents. John Calloway and his deputies maintained a reassuring presence, their confident demeanor helping restore the town's sense of security. Pine Ridge was healing, not by forgetting the violence that had touched it, but by responding with compassion, resilience, and determined reconstruction. At the hospital, Sarah found herself drawn to the emergency department she had helped defend. The damage had largely been repaired, equipment restored to its proper place. The environment once again focused on healing rather than survival. Yet subtle changes remained. Staff moved with more confidence. Security measures were more evident, and a new appreciation for preparedness informed every aspect of operations. As she donned her nurse's scrubs, no longer hiding her tattoos beneath unnecessary layers, Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. Not the burden of combat command or the isolation of hiding from her past, but the balanced purpose of someone who had found her place. The angel of death had come to Pine Ridge seeking anonymity and escape. Sarah Blackwood would remain, having found something far more valuable: belonging. 1 year later, Pine Ridge celebrated the opening of its expanded emergency medical center. The ceremony was modest by design: a ribbon cutting, speeches from local officials, tours of the new facilities that emphasized both advanced care capabilities and enhanced security features. Sarah Blackwood, now officially the hospital's emergency services director, stood alongside Mike Reynolds as he addressed the gathered community. At 39, she had fully embraced her dual identity: the skilled medical professional visible to all, the combat-trained protector known to few. Her tattoo remained visible beneath her professional attire, no longer a secret to be hidden but a part of her history she had integrated into her present. Some newer staff still occasionally whispered about the combat nurse and the night she had faced down the steel wolves, but such stories had gradually become part of Pine Ridge folklore rather than current events. After the ceremony, a young nurse approached Sarah hesitantly, curiosity evident in her expression. "Miss Blackwood, I couldn't help noticing your tattoo. It's military, isn't it?" Sarah glanced down at the combat medic insignia partially visible at her collar, considering how to respond. A year earlier, she might have deflected or withdrawn from such personal inquiry. Now she simply smiled. It is, she confirmed, a reminder of another life. Were you in the Gulf War? The younger woman asked, interest deepening. My father served there. Sarah's gaze drifted briefly to where Mike stood conversing with Emily and John, her closest friends, the core of what had become her found family in Pine Ridge. Then to Frank Wilson, whose hardware store had recovered and expanded. To the town beyond, peaceful and secure in the late afternoon sunlight. That's a long story, Sarah replied, turning back to the young nurse with genuine warmth in her expression. About becoming who you need to be when people need you most. As they walked together toward the hospital entrance, Sarah Blackwood, once the angel of death, now simply a highly respected nurse with an unusual background, began sharing carefully selected parts of her journey. Not the classified operations or the darkest moments, but the lessons learned about healing, protecting, and finding purpose in unexpected places. The steel wolves had come to Pine Ridge expecting easy prey and instead found a guardian they never anticipated. Their mistake had cost them everything, and in the process helped a warrior find peace not by running from her past, but by embracing all aspects of herself in service to a community she now proudly called home. For in the end, the most powerful healing happened not in hospitals or on battlefields, but in the heart of someone who had finally stopped running.